Hey guys, welcome to this intro video to Mixer. So let's get started. We're going to make a new mix, and I'm going to call this Copper Tiles. Cool. So here we go. We're going to go ahead. We're going to create a solid. It's this third one. We're going to make another one. We're going to bring the threshold up just a little bit. And so now we have these two options here, and the first one is a mask stack, which will give you the options for the procedural stuff, noises and stuff like that. And the second one here is a paint mask. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a mask stack, and we're going to create a solid in here, and we're going to leave it at 0.5. I just like having something to start off, like a foundation, similar to this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a pattern, and we're going to go gradient. And with this gradient, we're going to set this to -90. Cool. And so now we're going to create our so we're going to call this panel. So now, we're going to create our first offsets or tiles. So now we're going to name this panel offset, and we're going to set this to 2 repetitions in the Y. Cool. So now we got our shape going. And so now what I want to do is subtract. I want to offset it and then subtract the panels so we can have a staggering step in our tiles or our panels. So what we're going to do is just we're going to create checkers. So go back to pattern and hit checkered. We're going to hit this repeat to 1, and we're going to set this guy to subtract. So now we have the starting of our tiles, and we're going to name this panel sub. And so what we're going to do, let's just collapse all of these guys. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hit Control D, move it up. We're going to do that for all 3. All right, cool. And so we're going to name this panel 002, panel 02, panel 02. Cool. So now what we want to do is adjust the offsets on the on this guy, so we can start seeing it shift. So what we're going to do is we're going to lower this, and so now, okay, there we go. Now we start seeing our tile or panel shift, but we want to apply here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go to this panel sub, and we're going to hit invert. And you're thinking, why is these tiles not showing up? So what we got to do, basically like a Photoshop layer on these panel 02 offsets, we want to alt click on the gray area. So that means it's only going to affect panel 02, and we want to do the same thing with the sub. And we're going to set this to a add. So cool. So now we have our tiles, our panels, and they're offset, and it's looking good. So next, I want to create horizontal lines so we can add like that strip that binds these together. So let's just collapse all of these guys. And what we're going to do is we're just going to create another pattern. We're going to call it square. Or we're going to create a square, and then I'm going to name this horizontal lines, and then we'll name it sub, because first we're going to do is subtract them from the shape. So we're going to repeat this to 1. The spacing on this one's going to be 0 because I want to cut all the way through. And on this guy, I want to make it pretty big, so maybe let's try 4. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to hit invert, so it's going to pop up. Okay. So this is pretty much what's going to subtract into our shape. So we're going to go ahead and set this to subtract. Awesome. So now that we got what we want, maybe it's a bit too strong. We can always well, first we'd have to go back. We can either adjust the threshold on that guy, or we can go in and obviously adjust some of these settings. Let me put this back to 0.5. Oops. But for now, it's good. And so now we're going to add the shape that comes up. So what we're going to do, we're just going to duplicate this horizontal line sub, and then we're going to say add. And what we're going to do is just uncheck this invert. Let's put this to add. So it's going to pop up. And what we want to do now is just increase the spacing. So let's just shoot this thing up to 20. All right, cool. So now you can see that it's coming up. But now we want to fall into where we had added the subtract. So we need to give it a transform. So we're going to give it a transform, and we're going to alt click it to these horizontal lines, add, and let's name it that. Horizontal lines, add, offset. Cool. So now with the offset, we're just going to bring this guy, and we're just going to bring him as close as we can. We might need to make him a bit bigger. Let's try 21. Okay, cool. So little gap. So we just need to fiddle with this number a little bit, maybe 16. No, so we gotta make it, let's make it 20, 21. So little bit of fine tuning, but that's fine. So 24. And also, if we need to, we can always go back to the subtract. Let's collapse this. Open this up, and we can also just make this a little bigger. So we can make that a little bit bigger, and then bring the offset back to like 21. Oh, 24. Cool. I'm digging it. So now what we're going to do is, and we can actually, so if you think that these guys are coming up too high, I'm going to actually adjust that. So I'm going to go back to panel 02, I'm going to lower this opacity. Panel 1, lower this opacity. Cool. So that's feeling a lot better. If you want to check the tiling, you just hit T, and you can see how the material is tiling. So we're going to unclick that. So let's go back up, let's collapse this. So now, let's I want to give it a slight bevel, so we're just gonna go here and we're gonna add a bevel. Oh, oops, gotta bring all the way back up. So it's gonna bevel the whole thing pretty strong, and I don't want it to be this intense. So what I'm gonna do, this doesn't have a decimal value, so we're just gonna lower the opacity some. So we get some bevel, and it's not too intense. Cool. So I'm digging it. So let's continue forward. So let's get some distortion going. I want to, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a Perlin noise, and we're going to set his blending mode to distort. So now it's super wobbly, which is fine. We're still in the, we're just starting. So let's adjust the C. The C can be whatever. Let's bring the octaves up just one. Okay, pretty intense. And what we're going to do is we're just going to bring this way down, so where it's like a pretty subtle, maybe 11. And that feels good to me. So we're gonna leave it as that, and we're gonna name this large distortion. All right, we're gonna go ahead and collapse that. And so now I'm gonna create a medium distortion. So I'm gonna use a different noise. Let's do Whirly 2. Cool. And we're also gonna set this to distort. And so now he's getting, it's pretty choppy. But what we're gonna do, play with the seed a little bit, see what you like. Let's bring, and all we're gonna, actually, let's just lower the intensity pretty low. Cool. So we got some stuff going on. I'm digging it. And I'm going to call this medium distortion. Let's collapse that. So now I'm going to do one more pass and create a small distortion. So let's say Whirly 1. Cool. And then pretty much rinse and repeat. Hit distort. Let's name this small distortion. And he's pretty intense. We're gonna bring his, so all we're gonna do is just lower that opacity. Lower that opacity pretty low, let's say 0.1. And then what we're gonna do is bring those octaves up a little bit. So it's still pretty intense. Let's bring his distortion intensity down just a tad. And let's bring his opacity down even more. Cool. So now that I got all my distortions ready, let's collapse this. I'm feeling pretty good. So one thing I wanted to do is add little bolts that go across these horizontal lines. So what I'm going to do is create a shape, pattern, and then I'm going to create a circle. And I'm just going to pump this guy up all the way. We can increase the spacing, so maybe like, I don't know, 3.5 or 3.5 to 3.5. 3.5. Cool. And what we're going to do is we're going to subtract it. So now it's getting subtracted. We're going to lower that opacity. So, and then what we need to do is that it's not applying to our horizontal lines. So we got to give this guy, hold on, let's name him bolts sub. We need to give this guy its own transform. So bolts offset. Alt click to make it only affect this layer. And what we're going to do is just give him a slight offset. There we go. Boom. That easy. And so now what we have to do is get rid of all of the bolts on the panels. So what we're going to do is create a square shape, pattern square, and we're going to alt click because we only want to affect this. And what we're going to do is lower this to 1. We're going to set this to subtract, and there we go. It's simple as that. Now that we have our bolts ready, it's pretty much good to go. And I don't like how this is offset, or it's cut right here. So what we just got to do, final transform overall, and we're just going to move him, oh, not that way, this way. And this is pretty much it. This is our sculpt or a height map or whatever you want to call it, and it's pretty much ready to go to the texture pass. All right, well, check out part 2 on the texture or the albedo and roughness creation of this material. Thanks, guys. Bye.